Imagine stepping onto a ship in the year 1776 and asking the smartest people in the world a simple question. Which country will dominate the global economy 2 centuries from now? Almost nobody would have answered. The United States. Many would have pointed to Britain, whose ships connected continents and whose merchants controlled trade routes stretching around the globe. Others might have chosen China, which for much of human history had been one of the world's largest economies. Some may have looked toward India, whose textiles and craftsmanship had enriched traders for centuries. But a collection of rebellious colonies clinging to the eastern edge of North America? That would have sounded absurd. At the time, the future United States was small, fragile, and uncertain. Its population was only a few million people. Most lived near the Atlantic coast. Much of the continent beyond the Appalachian Mountains was still a vast and largely unknown frontier to European settlers. There were no giant corporations, no Wall Street skyscrapers, no Silicon Valley, no global dollar. No American consumer culture influencing the rest of the world. Nothing about the situation suggested that this young nation would one day produce more wealth than entire continents. And yet, that is exactly what happened. Today, the United States has one of the largest economies in human history. American companies shape the technologies billions of people use every day. The U.S. dollar is involved in much of global trade. American financial markets influence investment decisions from Tokyo to London to Sao Paulo. Products designed in California, financed in New York, manufactured through global supply chains, and sold around the world generate trillions of dollars in economic activity. The question is not whether America became an economic giant. The question is how. Because when historians look back at the story, they find something strange. America's rise was never guaranteed. In fact, many moments could have ended the story before it truly began. The country nearly collapsed financially after independence. It fought a devastating civil war that killed hundreds of thousands of people. It endured banking crises that wiped out fortunes overnight. It suffered through the Great Depression, when unemployment soared and millions struggled to survive. Entire industries rose and fell. Political battles repeatedly threatened to divide the nation, and yet after each crisis, America somehow emerged larger, richer, and more influential than before. Why? That question has fascinated economists, historians, and political leaders for generations. Some say the answer is natural resources. After all, the United States possesses enormous reserves of coal, oil, natural gas, iron ore, timber, and fertile farmland. Perhaps it simply won the geological lottery. Others argue that geography deserves most of the credit. North America is unusually blessed. Vast rivers connect the interior to the coast. Natural harbors support trade. Large areas enjoy favorable climates for agriculture. 2 oceans provide both access to global markets and protection from invasion. But geography alone cannot explain everything. History is filled with countries blessed with resources that never became economic superpowers. Others point toward immigration. For centuries, millions of people crossed oceans seeking opportunity in America. They arrived with different languages, traditions, skills, and ambitions. Together they helped build cities, railroads, factories, farms, and businesses. Yet immigration by itself cannot explain the whole story either. Many countries welcomed immigrants. Few became the world's dominant economy. Then there is technology. America became a center of invention and innovation. From interchangeable parts and assembly lines to microchips and the internet, American breakthroughs repeatedly transformed industries. But even that raises another question. Why did so many innovations emerge there in the first place? The deeper historians dig, the more complicated the answer becomes. America's rise was not caused by a single event. It was not one brilliant leader. It was not one war. Instead, it was the result of an extraordinary chain of circumstances stretching across centuries. Some were deliberate, others were accidents. Some decisions seemed insignificant at the time but changed history forever. Consider one example. In 1803, the United States purchased an enormous territory from France in what became known as the Louisiana Purchase. At the time, many people viewed it primarily as a land deal. Valuable, certainly, but nobody fully understood what it would mean. The purchase doubled the size of the country overnight. Hidden beneath that land were future farms, cities, railroads, mines, oil fields, and industries that would help power economic growth for generations. A single transaction reshaped the future of a continent, and that was only one of countless turning points. There were moments when technology unexpectedly amplified geography, moments when wars elsewhere created opportunities for America, moments when entrepreneurs built fortunes so large that they transformed entire industries, moments when ordinary workers, immigrants, inventors, and farmers collectively changed the course of economic history. Some of the most important factors were invisible: trust in institutions, property rights, financial systems, transportation networks, educational investments, cultural attitudes toward risk and opportunity. These things rarely make dramatic headlines, yet they often determine whether wealth can grow or stagnate. The story becomes even more fascinating when viewed from a global perspective. America did not rise in isolation. Its growth was connected to events happening thousands of miles away. European empires competed for territory. Global trade routes expanded. Industrial revolutions reshaped economies. World wars destroyed rivals. Technological revolutions created entirely new industries. Again and again, forces far beyond America's borders influenced its path. And sometimes the outcomes surprised everyone. The countries that seemed strongest in one century often struggled in the next. Empires that appeared unstoppable declined. Economic leaders lost their advantages. Meanwhile, the United States continued expanding its influence, not smoothly, not perfectly, but persistently. What makes this story remarkable is that it is ultimately a story about possibilities. How did a distant frontier become the center of global finance? How did scattered farming communities become industrial powerhouses? How did a nation that once borrowed money from Europe become the world's financial anchor? How did a country born in uncertainty become the economic giant against which all others are measured? The answers lie in geography, but also in human choices. They lie in natural resources, but also in institutions. They lie in luck, but also in ambition. Most importantly, they lie in a sequence of events that transformed not only America, but the entire world. To understand how it happened, we must travel back to a time before America was rich, before America was powerful, before America even existed. Because the roots of the world's economic giant were planted long before anyone realized what they would become. For most of human history, if you wanted to find the richest places on Earth, you would not sail toward North America. You would travel somewhere else, perhaps to the great cities of China, perhaps to the markets of India, perhaps to the commercial centers of the Middle East, perhaps to the ports of Europe, but almost certainly not to the land that would eventually become the United States. This is one of the easiest facts to forget when looking at the modern world. America's economic dominance feels so familiar today that many people unconsciously assume it was destined to happen. Yet for thousands of years, North America sat far from the main currents of global wealth. The continent contained thriving indigenous civilizations, sophisticated trade networks, and diverse societies stretching from the Arctic to the Gulf of Mexico. Long before Europeans arrived, goods, ideas, and technologies moved across vast distances through indigenous trade routes. But from the perspective of the global economy that connected Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, North America occupied a peripheral position. The centers of wealth were elsewhere. China, for example, spent long periods as one of the largest economies in the world. Its agricultural productivity supported enormous populations. Its craftsmen produced goods desired across continents. Chinese silk, porcelain, paper, and countless other products flowed through international trade networks. When European merchants gained access to Chinese goods, they often found themselves amazed by the sophistication of what they encountered. India was equally significant. For centuries, Indian textiles were among the most sought-after products on earth. Entire economies depended on access to Indian cloth. European traders competed fiercely for a share of that commerce. The wealth generated by Indian manufacturing attracted merchants from distant lands. Meanwhile, the Middle East occupied one of history's most valuable geographic positions. Trade routes linking Europe, Asia, and Africa passed through the region. Cities prospered by connecting different parts of the world. Merchants exchanged spices, textiles, metals, ideas, and technologies. Economic activity concentrated where trade converged. And then there was Europe. By the 15th century, Europe was becoming increasingly dynamic, not necessarily richer than every other region, but unusually competitive. Europe was fragmented into rival kingdoms, duchies, republics, and empires. This fragmentation often produced warfare, but it also produced something else: competition. A king who fell behind technologically risked losing territory. A merchant republic that failed to innovate could lose trade. A nation that discovered a new route or new source of wealth might suddenly leap ahead of its rivals. The constant pressure to compete encouraged exploration, experimentation, and risk-taking. In time, that pressure pushed Europeans toward the oceans. The story is often simplified as a search for new lands. In reality, it was largely a search for wealth. Asian goods were enormously valuable. Spices, in particular, could sell for extraordinary prices in European markets. The problem was access. Trade routes were long. Transportation costs were high. Numerous intermediaries stood between producers and consumers. European powers wanted direct connections. Whoever controlled those connections could become incredibly wealthy. This desire launched one of the most transformative periods in history, the Age of Exploration. Ships ventured farther into unknown waters. Navigational technologies improved. Maps became more sophisticated. Governments funded risky expeditions. Merchants dreamed of fortunes. Explorers searched for opportunities. Many of them were looking for Asia. Instead, they found something else: an entire hemisphere. At first, however, North America did not appear especially impressive from an economic perspective. The Spanish discovered vast reserves of gold and silver in parts of Central and South America. Compared to those spectacular finds, the lands farther north seemed less immediately rewarding. There were no mountains overflowing with precious metals, no obvious source of instant riches. The British colonies that eventually became the United States appeared relatively ordinary, and that turned out to be one of history's great ironies. Because what looked ordinary was actually extraordinary. The colonies possessed something that would prove more valuable than gold: land, an immense amount of land. Rich agricultural land, forested land, river-connected land, land capable of supporting enormous populations, land that stretched far beyond what most Europeans could easily imagine. At first, few people fully understood the significance of this advantage. Gold creates wealth quickly. Land creates wealth slowly. Gold attracts attention. Land rewards patience. The difference would shape the future. As British settlements expanded along the Atlantic coast, a distinctive economy began to emerge. Unlike colonies focused primarily on extracting precious metals. Many British settlers concentrated on farming, commerce, shipbuilding, fishing, and local industry. Communities became more permanent. Towns grew into cities. Economic activity diversified. Boston became a major commercial center. Philadelphia expanded rapidly. New York developed into a thriving port. Charleston connected southern agriculture to international markets. Merchants built businesses linking the colonies to the wider Atlantic economy. Shipbuilders supplied vessels. Farmers produced crops. Craftsmen manufactured goods. Trade flourished. Yet the colonies remained deeply tied to Britain. That relationship generated opportunities but also frustrations. British authorities imposed regulations on trade. Taxes created resentment. Political disputes intensified. Economic concerns frequently sat beneath political arguments. Colonists increasingly questioned whether distant leaders should control local economic decisions. The tension grew year after year. Eventually, it exploded. The American Revolution is often remembered through dramatic images, battles, declarations, patriotic speeches, military victories. All of those things mattered, but beneath them lay another issue: economic independence. Many colonists believed that political freedom and economic freedom were connected. They wanted greater control over their own commercial future. They wanted the ability to make decisions without constant interference from across the Atlantic. Winning the war achieved independence. It did not guarantee prosperity. In fact, the years immediately following the revolution were filled with uncertainty. The new nation faced serious problems. Debt from the war weighed heavily on public finances. The central government possessed limited authority. States often pursued their own interests. Economic coordination proved difficult. Some observers wondered whether the United States would survive at all. Looking back from the present, it is easy to assume success was inevitable. At the time, many people were not so sure. The country was fragile. The economy was fragmented. Trust in national institutions remained limited. And that is where one of the most important turning points in American economic history occurred. The Constitution. Today, most discussions about the Constitution focus on politics, elections, rights, and government power. Those issues are certainly important. But the Constitution was also an economic document. Its architects understood that prosperity required more than independence. It required functioning institutions. One of their greatest concerns was fragmentation. If each state behaved like a separate country, economic growth would suffer. Trade barriers could emerge. Currencies could vary. Commercial disputes could multiply. Investment would become more difficult. The Constitution sought to create something unusual for its time: a large, unified internal market. Goods could move more easily across state lines. Businesses could operate with greater predictability. Contracts carried stronger legal protections. Investors gained confidence that agreements would be honored. These developments may sound technical. They were anything but. Trust is one of the most powerful forces in economics. When people trust institutions, they are more willing to invest. When investors commit capital, businesses expand. When businesses expand, productivity rises. And when productivity rises, economies grow. The founders could not foresee every consequence of their decisions. But they created a framework that encouraged economic activity across a vast territory. That framework became increasingly valuable as the country expanded. And expand it did. In 1803, one of the most important transactions in history took place: the Louisiana Purchase. At the time, the United States was still a relatively young nation. France, under Napoleon Bonaparte, controlled a massive territory west of the Mississippi River. When an opportunity arose to purchase it, American leaders moved quickly. The price was approximately $15 million. The result was astonishing. The size of the country doubled almost overnight. Today, the Louisiana Purchase is often described as one of the greatest bargains ever made. That description is difficult to argue with. Yet what makes the purchase fascinating is that nobody fully understood what they had acquired. Maps were incomplete. Knowledge was limited. Large portions of the territory remained unexplored by Americans. Its future value was uncertain. Some critics questioned whether the purchase made sense. What exactly had the country bought? The answer would emerge gradually over the following centuries: farmland, cities, transportation corridors, mineral wealth, energy resources, economic opportunities on a continental scale. The purchase also strengthened control over the Mississippi River, one of the most valuable transportation systems in North America. That mattered enormously. Before modern transportation, rivers were economic lifelines. They moved goods more efficiently than roads, they connected distant communities, they lowered costs. Control of the Mississippi meant access to a vast interior region. Once again, geography quietly influenced history, and geography had been unusually generous. The United States possessed something few countries enjoyed: not merely resources, not merely territory, but a combination of features that reinforced one another: fertile farmland, navigable rivers, natural harbors, abundant fresh water, diverse climates, access to oceans, large areas suitable for settlement. Each advantage created possibilities. Together, they created something larger: potential, enormous potential. But potential is a dangerous word in history. Many societies possess potential. Far fewer transform that potential into lasting prosperity. The United States still faced enormous obstacles. Much of the continent remained undeveloped. Transportation was slow and expensive. Communication was limited. Markets were fragmented by distance. The nation possessed opportunities, but opportunities alone do not create wealth. Someone must connect them. Someone must build the roads, dig the canals, lay the tracks, create the businesses, develop the technologies, take the risks. And during the 19th century, Americans began doing exactly that. What followed was one of the greatest infrastructure revolutions ever witnessed. It would connect a continent, transform commerce, create entirely new industries, and turn geography itself into an economic weapon. Because the next phase of America's rise would begin with a simple but powerful idea. If people, goods, and information could move faster, everything else could grow faster too. If geography gave America potential, transportation unlocked it. This may sound like an obvious statement today. In a world of highways, airports, satellites, and fiber optic cables, moving people and information feels effortless. But in the early 19th century, distance was one of the greatest enemies of economic growth. A farmer could grow an excellent crop and still struggle to make money. A merchant could identify a profitable market and still fail to reach it. A manufacturer could produce useful goods and still be unable to sell them beyond a limited local area. The problem was not production. The problem was movement. Moving things was expensive, sometimes unbelievably expensive. In many places, transporting goods just 30 miles over rough roads could cost more than shipping them across an ocean. That reality shaped everything. Entire regions remained economically isolated. Communities often produced most of what they consumed because importing goods was difficult and costly. Prices varied dramatically from place to place. Opportunities existed, but distance stood in the way. For the United States, this problem was particularly serious. The country possessed vast territory. That was an advantage. But it was also a challenge. A large nation that cannot connect its regions remains economically fragmented. A large nation that successfully connects its regions becomes something else entirely. It becomes a giant market. And giant markets are powerful. The first major breakthrough came through water. In 1817, construction began on one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects in American history, the Erie Canal. At the time, many critics considered the project absurd. The canal would stretch more than 360 miles across New York State. It would connect the Hudson River to Lake Erie. It would require enormous amounts of labor, engineering, and money. Some opponents mocked the project as Clinton's Ditch, a reference to New York Governor DeWitt Clinton, one of its strongest supporters. To skeptics, the canal looked like an expensive fantasy. To supporters, it looked like the future. When the canal opened in 1825, the results exceeded almost everyone's expectations. Transportation costs collapsed. What had once taken weeks could now be accomplished in days. Farmers in the interior gained access to distant markets. Merchants could move goods more efficiently. Trade expanded dramatically. And no city benefited more than New York. Before the canal, New York was an important port. After the canal, it became the gateway to the American interior. Goods flowing from the Midwest increasingly passed through New York Harbor. Commerce exploded. Population surged. Investment poured in. The city began a transformation that would eventually make it one of the financial capitals of the world. A single infrastructure project had altered the economic geography of an entire nation. But the transportation revolution was only beginning. At nearly the same time, another innovation was changing America's rivers. For centuries, rivers had offered advantages and limitations. Traveling downstream was relatively easy. Traveling upstream was often difficult, slow, and expensive. Then came the steamboat. Powered by steam engines rather than currents or wind, steamboats transformed inland transportation. The Mississippi River system suddenly became far more valuable. Communities that had once seemed remote became connected to larger markets. Agricultural regions expanded. Trade accelerated. Economic opportunities multiplied. To many Americans, it felt as though the continent itself was shrinking. Places that had once seemed impossibly distant became reachable. Yet even these advances would soon be overshadowed by something bigger: the railroad. Few technologies have transformed a country as completely as railroads transformed 19th century America. To understand why, imagine trying to cross the continent before railroads existed. The journey could take months. Travelers faced rivers, mountains, deserts, disease, accidents, and uncertainty. Transportation costs limited economic activity. Settlement expanded slowly. Then steel rails began spreading across the landscape. At first, railroads connected nearby cities. Soon they linked regions. Eventually they connected the continent. The impact was revolutionary. Goods moved faster. People traveled farther. Businesses reached larger markets. Information spread more quickly. Investment surged. Entire industries emerged to support railroad construction. The railroad boom became one of the largest economic undertakings in American history. Thousands of miles of track had to be laid. Bridges had to be built. Tunnels had to be carved through mountains. Locomotives had to be manufactured. Stations had to be constructed. The workforce required for these projects was enormous. Many of those workers were immigrants, Irish laborers blasted through rock and earth, Chinese workers performed some of the most dangerous construction tasks in the American West. Their contributions helped make continental transportation possible. The human cost was often severe. Accidents were common. Working conditions could be brutal. Many workers died, yet their labor fundamentally changed the nation. One of the most dramatic moments came in 1869. At Promontory Summit, Utah Territory, crews completed the first transcontinental railroad. A ceremonial golden spike marked the connection. The event symbolized more than transportation. It symbolized a new economic reality. For the first time, the Atlantic and Pacific coasts were connected by rail. The continent had become a single economic space. A manufacturer in the east could sell goods to customers thousands of miles away. Farmers could reach national markets. Investors could pursue opportunities across vast distances. The United States was becoming a continental machine. Railroads also changed something surprisingly fundamental: time itself. Before railroads, most towns operated according to local solar time. Noon occurred when the sun reached its highest point. This system worked reasonably well in an era of slow travel. Railroads made it chaotic. Trains moving between cities required coordinated schedules. Local time differences created confusion. The solution was standardized time zones. Think about how extraordinary that is. A transportation technology became so influential that it changed how an entire society organized time. Economic development was reshaping daily life in ways people had never anticipated. Meanwhile, another invention was attacking the problem of distance from a different direction: the telegraph. Before the telegraph, information traveled at roughly the speed of transportation. Messages moved by horse, ship, or human messenger. Communication delays were unavoidable. Business decisions could take weeks. News often arrived long after events occurred. Then came a revolutionary idea. What if messages could travel through wires? What if information could move faster than people? The telegraph made that possible. Suddenly, communication that once required days or weeks could happen in minutes. Financial markets became more connected. Businesses coordinated operations across larger areas. Newspapers received information more quickly. Governments communicated more efficiently. For the first time in history, information could travel almost instantly across vast distances. The modern information age had begun. Transportation and communication were evolving together. That combination proved incredibly powerful. Railroads moved goods, telegraphs moved information. Together, they integrated the national economy. A merchant in New York could learn commodity prices in Chicago. A manufacturer could coordinate deliveries across multiple states. Investors could monitor opportunities from afar. Economic activity accelerated. But infrastructure alone does not create prosperity. It creates possibilities. To understand what happened next, we need to look at the people who seized those possibilities. And few groups would play a larger role than immigrants. During the 19th century, millions arrived in America from across Europe. Many came because they had little choice. The Irish potato famine pushed huge numbers of desperate families toward the United States. In parts of Germany, political instability and economic hardship encouraged emigration. Later waves arrived from Italy, Eastern Europe, Scandinavia, and countless other places. The journey itself was often terrifying. Families crowded onto ships for weeks. Disease spread easily. Conditions could be miserable. Many passengers arrived exhausted and uncertain about what awaited them, yet they kept coming. Why? Because compared with conditions they left behind, America represented possibility, not certainty, not guaranteed success. Possibility and possibility can be an incredibly powerful force. Some immigrants became farmers, Others worked in factories. Many labored on railroads, canals, mines, and construction projects. Some eventually opened businesses of their own. Over time, immigrants became workers, consumers, entrepreneurs, inventors, and investors. Their labor helped fuel the country's expansion. Their ambitions helped shape its future. The population grew rapidly. Cities expanded. Industries multiplied. Economic activity intensified. And beneath it all lay another enormous advantage. Resources. The United States possessed some of the richest resource deposits in the world. Coal-powered factories. Iron ore supplied steel production. Timber supported construction. Agricultural land generated food surpluses. These resources mattered because industrialization was gathering momentum. Factories were becoming larger. Machines were becoming more important. Production methods were evolving. The economy was beginning to shift from primarily agricultural activity toward large-scale industrial production, and nowhere was that shift more visible than in the rise of manufacturing. In earlier eras, most goods were produced by skilled craftsmen working in small workshops. Production volumes remained limited, costs remained relatively high. Industrialization changed everything. Machines multiplied output, factories concentrated labor and equipment, standardized production lowered costs. Consumers gained access to goods that would previously have been considered luxuries. One particularly important innovation involved interchangeable parts. Today, replacing a broken component seems normal. In the early 19th century, it was revolutionary. Standardized parts made manufacturing more efficient. Repairs became easier. Production expanded. The idea spread across industries. America became increasingly associated with large-scale manufacturing techniques. The effects reached far beyond factories. Greater productivity meant more goods. More goods meant lower prices. Lower prices meant larger markets. Larger markets encouraged further investment. The cycle reinforced itself. By the middle of the 19th century, something extraordinary was happening. Transportation was improving, communication was accelerating, population was growing, resources were being exploited, markets were expanding, industry was emerging. Each development strengthened the others. The United States was no longer simply a collection of states spread across a continent. It was becoming an integrated economic system, a machine of astonishing scale. But enormous growth often creates new tensions. As wealth expanded, questions emerged. Who would benefit? Who would control the nation's future? What kind of economy was America becoming? And looming over all of these questions was a conflict that threatened to destroy everything the country had built. Because while railroads connected regions and factories generated wealth, the nation remained deeply divided over an issue that touched economics, politics, and morality all at once. That issue was slavery, and the struggle over it would push America toward its greatest crisis. By the middle of the 19th century, the United States was growing faster than almost anyone had imagined. Cities were expanding, railroads were spreading, factories were multiplying, new territories were opening. Wealth was being created on a scale that seemed astonishing compared to earlier generations. Yet behind every railroad track, every steel mill, every grain shipment, and every factory stood people, millions of them. The rise of the American economy was never simply a story about machines, resources, or infrastructure. It was a story about human beings, people willing to leave everything behind, people willing to take enormous risks, people willing to work under conditions that would seem unimaginable today, and people ambitious enough to build entirely new industries. If geography supplied the stage and transportation connected the country, people provided the energy that made everything move. No force illustrates this better than immigration. In the early decades of the Republic, immigration existed, but it remained relatively modest. Then, the flood began. By the mid-1800s, millions of Europeans were heading toward America. Some were running from disaster, others were chasing opportunity. Many were doing both. Among the most famous were the Irish. In 1845, a potato disease began devastating Ireland's primary food crop. The consequences were catastrophic. The Great Famine killed hundreds of thousands of people and forced many more to leave. Families sold possessions. Parents made impossible decisions. Children crossed oceans. Entire villages emptied. For many Irish immigrants, America was not a dream. It was survival. When they arrived, life was rarely easy. Many found themselves crowded into poor neighborhoods in rapidly growing cities like New York and Boston. Jobs were dangerous. Housing was cramped. Discrimination was common. Signs reading "No Irish Need Apply" became symbols of the hostility many encountered. Yet, they stayed. They worked. And over time, they became part of the economic engine powering the country forward. German immigrants arrived in large numbers as well. Some fled political turmoil after failed revolutions in Europe. Others sought economic opportunities unavailable at home. Many brought valuable skills. Farmers expanded agricultural production. Craftsmen contributed to growing industries. Entrepreneurs opened businesses. Communities developed schools, churches, and local institutions. Then came later waves from Italy, Poland, Russia, Austria-Hungary, and other parts of Europe. Many arrived through Ellis Island after it opened in 1892. For countless families, Ellis Island became the gateway between two worlds, one filled with familiar languages, traditions, and limitations, the other filled with uncertainty and possibility. Imagine standing on the deck of a crowded ship after weeks at sea. The journey has been exhausting. You own little. You know few people. You may not speak English. Then, through the morning fog, the Statue of Liberty appears. For millions, that moment became one of the most memorable experiences of their lives, not because success was guaranteed, because hope suddenly seemed possible. America's economy absorbed these newcomers at an extraordinary rate. Factories needed workers, railroads needed laborers, construction projects needed manpower, mines needed employees willing to perform dangerous tasks. The industrial economy seemed endlessly hungry for labor. The relationship worked both ways. Businesses gained workers. Workers gained opportunities. Not perfect opportunities. Not equal opportunities. But opportunities that many believed exceeded what they could find elsewhere. The result was explosive growth. Cities transformed almost overnight. Chicago offers one of the most dramatic examples in history. In 1830, Chicago was barely more than a frontier settlement. By the end of the 19th century, it had become one of the world's great cities. Railroads converged there. Meatpacking plants operated on a massive scale. Factories employed huge workforces. Immigrants arrived by the thousands. The city became a symbol of industrial America. Other cities experienced similar transformations. Pittsburgh became synonymous with steel. Cleveland emerged as an industrial center. Detroit developed a manufacturing base that would later help make it the automobile capital of the world. New York evolved into a commercial and financial giant. Everywhere the same pattern appeared. More people, more businesses, more production, more wealth. Yet prosperity was not evenly distributed. The industrial age created fortunes unlike anything America had previously seen. A handful of individuals accumulated wealth on a scale so vast that contemporaries struggled to comprehend it. Few stories capture this era better than that of Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie arrived from Scotland as a poor immigrant boy. His family settled in Pennsylvania. He worked in textile factories as a child. He delivered telegraph messages. He climbed slowly through the emerging industrial economy. Then, he entered the steel business. The timing was perfect. America was building railroads, bridges, factories, and cities. All required steel. Carnegie recognized the opportunity and built one of the largest steel enterprises in the world. By the time he sold his company in 1901, he had become one of the richest people in history. His story seemed to embody the American dream. But Carnegie was not alone. John D. Rockefeller built Standard Oil into an industrial empire. The oil industry was still young when Rockefeller entered it. Kerosene illuminated homes, lubricants powered machinery, demand was growing rapidly. Rockefeller focused obsessively on efficiency. He reduced costs, expanded operations, acquired competitors, created systems that allowed his company to dominate the industry. Supporters praised his business skills. Critics accused him of creating monopolies. Both perspectives reflected parts of the truth. Then there was Cornelius Vanderbilt. He began with boats, expanded into railroads, and helped shape the transportation networks connecting the nation. And J.P. Morgan, a financier whose influence stretched across industries. Morgan helped organize capital on a scale necessary for large industrial enterprises. In many ways, he represented a new reality. Modern economies required enormous amounts of investment. Large corporations needed access to large pools of money. Finance became increasingly important. These men became famous, but they were also symbols of broader forces. America was inventing a new form of capitalism. The economy was becoming larger, more interconnected, and more complex. Businesses grew beyond anything earlier generations had known. Small family firms still existed, but giant corporations increasingly dominated major industries. This development happened for a reason. Scale created advantages. A larger company could lower costs. Invest in technology, expand distribution, negotiate better prices, serve larger markets. Economies of scale became one of the defining features of industrial America. The results were dramatic. Steel became cheaper. Transportation became more efficient. Manufacturing output surged. Consumers gained access to more products at lower prices. Productivity rose. Living standards gradually improved. Yet the story was not entirely positive. Industrialization imposed heavy costs. Factory work could be brutal. Hours were long. Safety standards were often minimal. Injuries were common. Child labor remained widespread in many industries. Labor disputes became increasingly frequent. Workers organized unions. Employers resisted. Strikes sometimes turned violent. The struggle over who would benefit from industrial growth became one of the central conflicts of the era. One of the most famous examples occurred in 1892 at the Homestead Steel Works near Pittsburgh. Workers and management clashed over wages and control. The confrontation escalated into violence. The event became a symbol of broader tensions throughout industrial America. Economic growth was creating wealth, but it was also creating questions about fairness, power, and opportunity. Those debates continue to this day. Meanwhile, technological innovation kept accelerating. Factories adopted new machinery. Electricity began transforming production. Communication improved. Scientific advances spread through industry. The economy became increasingly productive. And then there was agriculture. Ironically, even as industry expanded, American farming remained one of the country's greatest strengths. The combination of fertile land, mechanization, and transportation networks allowed farmers to produce enormous quantities of food. Grain from the Midwest reached global markets. American agricultural exports became increasingly important. The country was feeding not only itself, but growing portions of the world. This mattered because food surpluses support everything else. When fewer people are needed to produce food, more people can work in factories, businesses, laboratories, and offices. Agricultural productivity quietly supported industrial growth. By the late 19th century, the pieces were coming together. A huge internal market, abundant resources, rapidly growing cities, mass immigration, expanding transportation networks, increasing industrial output, rising financial sophistication, technological innovation. Each element strengthened the others. The United States was becoming something new, not merely a large country, not merely a successful country, an industrial giant. The numbers told the story. Steel production surged, railroad mileage exploded, factory output climbed year after year, population growth accelerated. Economic expansion seemed relentless. Then, around the turn of the 20th century, a remarkable milestone was reached. The United States became the world's largest industrial economy. It had surpassed Britain. The very empire that had once governed the colonies now found itself overtaken by its former subjects. The achievement was extraordinary, yet it also revealed an important distinction. Producing more goods than any other nation did not automatically make America the center of the global economy. Britain still dominated international finance. London remained the world's financial capital. The British pound remained enormously influential. Global trade networks still reflected decades of British leadership. America had become the world's largest workshop. It had not yet become the world's economic commander. That transformation would require something else, something nobody wanted, something that would devastate entire continents. Because the events that ultimately elevated America from industrial giant to global economic superpower would begin not in New York, Chicago, or Pittsburgh. They would begin on the battlefields of Europe. And they would change the world forever. By the early 20th century, the United States had accomplished something remarkable. It had transformed itself from a young republic into the world's largest industrial economy. Its factories produced enormous quantities of steel, machinery, textiles, and consumer goods. Its railroads connected a continent. Its population had grown dramatically. Its cities rivaled those of Europe. Yet despite all this success, America still occupied an unusual position in the global economy. It was powerful. But it was not yet dominant. The financial heart of the world remained in London. The British Empire still controlled trade routes stretching across the globe. European powers possessed vast colonial networks. International finance, diplomacy, and commerce continued to revolve largely around Europe. In many ways, America was like an exceptionally strong challenger waiting outside the championship arena. Its potential was obvious. Its influence was growing. But the existing order had not yet been replaced. Then, the old order began destroying itself. In the summer of 1914, a political crisis in Europe escalated into something far larger. What many leaders expected to be a short conflict became one of the deadliest wars in human history. The First World War engulfed much of Europe. Millions of soldiers marched to battle. Entire regions became killing fields. Governments consumed enormous amounts of resources. Factories shifted toward military production. National debts expanded rapidly. And while Europe fought, America watched, at least initially. The United States remained neutral during the early years of the conflict. This neutrality created a unique economic position. The warring nations still needed food. They still needed raw materials. They still needed equipment. American businesses supplied many of those needs. Farmers increased production. Manufacturers expanded output. Exports surged. Money flowed into the United States. The war that devastated Europe created economic opportunities across the Atlantic. This was not because Americans caused the conflict, nor because the war itself was beneficial. The human suffering was catastrophic. But economically, The balance of power was beginning to shift. When the United States eventually entered the war in 1917, the outcome was influenced not only by soldiers and generals, but also by industrial capacity. America could produce. And production wins wars. Factories expanded rapidly. Shipyards launched vessels at astonishing rates. Agricultural output remained high. The country demonstrated a capacity for mobilization that impressed observers around the world. When the war ended in 1918, Europe faced a difficult reality. Much of the continent had suffered immense damage. Millions of workers were dead or injured. Governments carried enormous debts. Infrastructure required rebuilding. Economic recovery would take years. Meanwhile, the United States emerged comparatively stronger. Its industrial base remained intact. Its productive capacity had grown. Its financial position improved. Perhaps most importantly, America was increasingly becoming a creditor nation. For generations, the United States had borrowed substantial amounts of capital from Europe. Now the situation was reversing. European governments owed money to American lenders. The flow of financial power was changing direction. This shift represented one of the most important turning points in modern economic history. Money influences power. Credit influences power. Financial leadership influences power. The center of gravity was moving westward. Yet the transition was not complete. The 1920s introduced a new chapter, a decade often remembered through images of jazz music, glamorous parties, and booming stock markets. The Roaring Twenties. Behind the cultural changes lay something deeper, a revolution in consumer economics. Earlier generations had often purchased goods only when absolutely necessary. The 1920s helped normalize a different idea: consumption as a way of life. Businesses increasingly targeted mass markets. Advertising expanded. Brand identities became more important. Credit became more widely available. Consumers purchased products that previous generations could scarcely imagine owning. Few figures symbolized this transformation better than Henry Ford. Ford did not invent the automobile. What he did was arguably more important. He helped make automobiles affordable. The Model T became one of the most influential products in history. Ford's use of assembly line production dramatically reduced manufacturing costs. Workers specialized in specific tasks. Products moved efficiently through factories. Output increased. Prices fell. Millions of Americans gained access to automobiles. The consequences extended far beyond transportation. Cars required roads. Roads encouraged suburban development. Gas stations appeared. Motels emerged. New industries formed around automobile ownership. A single product reshaped the physical and economic landscape of the nation. This was becoming a recurring pattern in American history. Innovation created productivity. Productivity lowered costs. Lower costs expanded markets. Expanded markets encouraged further innovation. The cycle reinforced itself. For a time, prosperity seemed unstoppable. Stock prices soared. Optimism spread. Many believed a new era of permanent growth had arrived. Then reality intervened. In October 1929, the stock market crashed. The collapse did not immediately create the Great Depression, but it revealed deep weaknesses within the economy. Banks failed. Businesses closed. Unemployment surged. Investment evaporated. Fear spread through financial markets. The scale of suffering was immense. Families lost savings. Workers lost jobs. Farmers struggled to survive. Entire communities faced hardship. For many Americans, the Depression shattered assumptions about economic progress. The country that had seemed unstoppable suddenly appeared vulnerable. This crisis raised profound questions. Had capitalism failed? Could recovery occur? What role should government play in economic life? The answers would reshape the nation. Franklin Delano Roosevelt entered office in 1933, facing one of the greatest challenges in American history. His administration launched a series of programs collectively known as the New Deal. Some initiatives focused on employment, others targeted financial reform. Infrastructure projects created jobs. Banking regulations sought to restore confidence. Government became more actively involved in managing economic stability. The effectiveness of every individual program remains debated by historians. But one outcome is clear. The relationship between government and the economy changed permanently. Americans increasingly expected public institutions to play a role during major economic crises. The Great Depression left lasting scars. Yet an even larger event was approaching. In 1939, war erupted once again in Europe. Soon it spread across continents. The Second World War would become the largest conflict in human history. And once again, it would transform the global economy. Initially, the United States remained outside the fighting. But even before formally entering the war, America was becoming a critical supplier. Britain needed equipment. Other allies needed supplies. Factories expanded production. Industrial mobilization accelerated. Then, after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the United States entered the war directly. What followed was one of the most extraordinary production efforts ever witnessed. Factories that had manufactured civilian goods shifted toward military output. Automobile plants produced tanks. Industrial facilities manufactured aircraft. Shipyards launched vessels at astonishing speeds. Workers labored around the clock. Women entered industrial jobs in unprecedented numbers. The image of Rosie the Riveter became a symbol of this transformation. Millions of women helped sustain wartime production while men served overseas. The scale was almost difficult to comprehend. American factories produced hundreds of thousands of aircraft, tens of thousands of tanks, huge quantities of trucks, ammunition, and equipment. The United States became known as the arsenal of democracy. The phrase was more than rhetoric. It reflected reality. America's industrial capacity became one of the decisive factors in the Allied victory. German factories were powerful. Japanese industry was formidable. But the productive scale achieved by the United States was extraordinary. One observer famously noted that the war was won as much in factories as on battlefields. There was considerable truth in that statement. Behind every soldier stood an industrial system providing food, fuel, transportation, weapons, and supplies. Economic strength became military strength, and military victory would soon translate into economic influence. When World War II ended in 1945, much of Europe lay devastated. Cities had been destroyed, infrastructure damaged, industries disrupted. The human losses were staggering. Japan faced enormous destruction as well. Large portions of the industrialized world required rebuilding. The United States occupied a very different position. Its homeland had avoided the physical devastation experienced elsewhere. Its factories remained intact. Its workforce remained productive. Its industrial capacity was enormous. Its financial position was strong. The contrast was striking. For the second time in a generation, America's major competitors emerged from a global conflict weakened. The United States emerged stronger. This advantage cannot be understood without appreciating geography once again. Oceans had provided a degree of protection. The Atlantic and Pacific separated the American mainland from many of the war's most destructive battlefields. While soldiers fought overseas, factories at home continued operating. The country's productive machinery survived largely intact. This fact would prove enormously important. By the end of the war, the United States accounted for an astonishing share of global industrial output. Its economy dwarfed those of most competitors. Its financial influence expanded rapidly. Its currency gained international importance. Its corporations possessed unprecedented scale. The world needed reconstruction. America possessed resources, capital, and industrial capacity. The result was the beginning of what many historians call the American century. For the first time, the United States was not merely one of the world's largest economies. It was becoming the central pillar of the global economic system itself. The age of industrial growth had created the giant. The world wars had elevated it. But a new question now emerged. How would America use this position? Because building wealth is one challenge. Building a global economic order is another, and in the years after 1945. The United States would help create a system that shaped the modern world more profoundly than almost anyone realized at the time. When World War II ended, much of the world faced a problem that seemed almost impossible to solve. Entire cities had been reduced to rubble. Transportation networks were damaged. Factories had been destroyed. Governments carried enormous debts. Millions of people were displaced. The global economy needed rebuilding. And there was only one country with the resources: industrial capacity and financial strength to lead that process. The United States. This moment marked something far bigger than the end of a war. It marked the beginning of a new economic era. For centuries, global wealth had shifted among empires, kingdoms, and great powers. Now, for the first time, a single nation stood at the center of a worldwide economic system. America had become more than a large economy. It had become the organizing force around which much of the global economy would operate. But how exactly did that happen? How does a country move from being rich to becoming the central hub of world commerce, finance, and innovation? The answer begins before the war had even ended. In July 1944, representatives from 44 nations gathered in a small town in New Hampshire. The meeting took place at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods. Few people outside policy circles paid much attention at the time. Yet the decisions made there would shape the world for decades. The delegates faced a difficult challenge. The global economy before World War II had been unstable. Financial crises had spread across borders. Competitive currency devaluations had disrupted trade. Economic nationalism had intensified tensions. Many leaders believed a more stable system was needed. The result was the Bretton Woods system. At its heart was a simple idea: create rules that encourage international trade and financial stability. The United States played the leading role. Why? Because it had the resources to do so. American gold reserves were enormous. Its economy was by far the largest among participating nations. Its industrial capacity remained unmatched. Its financial position was exceptionally strong. As part of the new system, the U.S. dollar became the anchor of global finance. Other currencies were linked to the dollar. The dollar itself was linked to gold. The arrangement helped create stability during a period of reconstruction. What seemed like a technical financial decision had profound consequences. The dollar became increasingly important in international transactions. Governments held dollar reserves. Businesses conducted trade in dollars. Financial markets relied on dollar-denominated assets. Over time, this created a powerful network effect. The more people used dollars, the more useful dollars became. This advantage would endure long after the original Bretton Woods system disappeared. Meanwhile, another major initiative was taking shape. Europe needed rebuilding. Factories had to be restored. Infrastructure required repair. Economic recovery was essential. American policymakers worried that prolonged hardship might create political instability. The solution became known as the Marshall Plan. Named after Secretary of State George Marshall, the program provided substantial financial assistance to Western European countries. The effort was enormous. Billions of dollars flowed into reconstruction projects. Factories reopened. Transportation networks improved. Economic activity accelerated. The Marshall Plan was partly humanitarian. It was partly strategic. And it was also economic. Healthy trading partners create opportunities. Prosperous economies buy goods. Stable regions encourage investment. Helping rebuild Europe was not simply charity. It also supported a broader international economic system. The results were remarkable. Western Europe recovered faster than many observers expected. Trade expanded. Productivity increased. Economic growth accelerated. The global economy became increasingly interconnected, and at the center of much of that system stood the United States. At the same time, America's domestic economy was entering a period of extraordinary prosperity. The war years had generated immense industrial capacity. Factories that once produced military equipment shifted toward consumer goods. Demand exploded. Millions of Americans wanted homes, cars, appliances, furniture, consumer products. The economy responded. One of the most visible changes occurred in housing. Before World War II, large-scale suburban development remained relatively limited. After the war, suburbs expanded rapidly. Developers constructed vast new neighborhoods. Families purchased homes at unprecedented rates. The American suburb became one of the defining symbols of the post-war era. This shift created economic ripple effects throughout the country. A new home required furniture. Furniture required factories. Families purchased appliances. Appliance manufacturers expanded production. Cars became increasingly essential. Roads required construction. Gas stations appeared. Shopping centers developed. Each purchase stimulated additional activity. Growth reinforced growth. Another crucial factor was education. Millions of veterans benefited from the GI Bill, which helped finance higher education. College enrollment surged. Universities expanded. Research capabilities improved. A more educated workforce emerged. The long-term consequences were enormous. Economic growth increasingly depended not only on physical resources but also on knowledge. The United States invested heavily in both. The combination proved powerful. Then came one of the most transformative infrastructure projects in history, the interstate highway system. Authorized during the 1950s, the project eventually created a vast network of high-speed roads connecting the country. The scale was staggering. Thousands of miles of highways linked cities, regions, and markets. Travel became faster. Transportation costs declined. Businesses expanded distribution networks. Consumers gained access to wider markets. The effects resembled those of the railroad revolution nearly a century earlier. Once again, transportation reshaped economic geography. Factories could serve larger territories. Tourism expanded. Suburban growth accelerated. Logistics became more efficient. The national economy became even more integrated. Meanwhile, American companies were expanding internationally. Brands that began as domestic enterprises became global names. Products manufactured in the United States appeared in markets around the world. American movies, music, and cultural exports spread internationally as well. Economic influence increasingly overlapped with cultural influence. People who had never visited America encountered American products in their daily lives. This phenomenon strengthened the country's global position. Yet perhaps the most important development was occurring in places that rarely made newspaper headlines. Research laboratories, universities, scientific institutions, government agencies. The post-war era witnessed an unprecedented investment in research and development. Part of this effort stemmed from lessons learned during the war. Scientific breakthroughs had proven enormously important. Radar, advanced manufacturing techniques, nuclear technology, medical innovations. Policymakers recognized that future prosperity would depend heavily on innovation. As a result, enormous resources flowed toward research. Universities expanded scientific programs. Government agencies funded projects. Private companies established laboratories. The relationship between science, education, and industry grew stronger. This investment produced results that would reshape the future. Advances in electronics, computing, medicine, materials science, aerospace technology. Many of the innovations that define the modern world trace their roots to this period. The Cold War intensified these trends. Competition with the Soviet Union encouraged technological advancement. The space race accelerated research. Defense spending supported innovation. Scientists and engineers gained new opportunities. The economic benefits extended far beyond military applications. Technologies developed for one purpose often found unexpected commercial uses. This pattern became a recurring feature of American innovation. Government investment, scientific research, private entrepreneurship, commercial application. The combination generated extraordinary economic value. By the 1950s and 1960s, many observers viewed American prosperity as almost unstoppable. Manufacturing dominated global markets. Consumer spending remained strong. Productivity continued rising. Wages increased. The middle class expanded. The standard of living enjoyed by many Americans exceeded that of previous generations by a remarkable margin. For a time, it seemed possible that the United States might maintain overwhelming economic superiority indefinitely. But history rarely remains static. The very success of the post-war order contained the seeds of future competition. Europe recovered. Japan recovered. Industries rebuilt. New competitors emerged. Countries that had once depended heavily on American assistance became increasingly capable economic powers in their own right. German manufacturers became world-class exporters. Japanese companies gained reputations for quality and efficiency. International competition intensified. The global economy became more dynamic. America remained powerful. But it no longer stood alone. This development was not necessarily a failure. In many ways, it reflected the success of Reconstruction efforts. The world was becoming wealthier. Trade expanded. International markets grew. Yet competition brought new challenges. American businesses could no longer assume dominance. Efficiency mattered. Innovation mattered. Adaptation mattered. And adaptation would soon become essential. Because during the 1970s, a series of shocks would challenge assumptions that had defined the post-war era. Energy crises, inflation, economic stagnation, rising foreign competition. Many people began wondering whether America's best years were behind it. The nation that had built the post-war economic order suddenly faced difficult questions about its own future. Yet what happened next would reveal one of the most important characteristics of American economic history. Again and again, when old sources of strength weakened, new ones emerged. And the next source of strength would not come from steel mills, railroads, or oil fields. It would emerge from computer chips, venture capital, and a small region in California that would change the world. A place that at the time few people outside the technology industry had ever heard of. Silicon Valley. If someone had looked at the United States in the late 1960s, they might have concluded that the country's economic dominance was permanent. The nation remained enormously wealthy. Its industries were powerful. Its companies were global leaders. Its universities attracted talent from around the world. The dollar sat at the center of international finance. The post-war boom seemed almost endless. But history has a habit of surprising people who assume current trends will continue forever. The first signs of trouble appeared gradually. Then they arrived all at once. During the 1970s, America faced a series of challenges that shook confidence in the economic model that had driven decades of prosperity. Inflation surged, economic growth slowed, energy prices exploded. International competition intensified. And for the first time in generations, many Americans began wondering whether their country's economic supremacy was beginning to fade. The energy crisis illustrated the problem. For decades, inexpensive energy had powered economic growth. Factories depended on it. Transportation depended on it. Suburban lifestyles depended on it. The entire economy had been built around assumptions of abundant fuel. Then those assumptions collided with reality. Oil-producing nations gained greater influence over global markets. Supply disruptions triggered dramatic price increases. Gasoline shortages appeared. Long lines formed at service stations. Consumers faced rising costs. Businesses struggled with uncertainty. The psychological impact was enormous. Americans had grown accustomed to expansion. Now they were confronting limits. At the same time, another challenge emerged from abroad. The countries rebuilt after World War II were no longer merely recovering. They were competing. Japanese automakers produced vehicles known for reliability and fuel efficiency. German manufacturers earned reputations for precision and quality. Foreign companies increasingly challenged American firms in industries once considered secure. The world was changing. Competition was becoming global. This was a difficult adjustment. For decades, American manufacturers had operated with relatively limited foreign competition. Now they faced rivals capable of matching or exceeding their performance in certain sectors. Factories closed in some regions. Communities that had depended on manufacturing experienced economic pain. The industrial landscape began to shift. Observers debated whether America was entering a period of long-term decline. Books appeared predicting the rise of Japan as the dominant economic power of the future. News reports highlighted industrial challenges. Politicians worried about competitiveness. The mood was very different from the optimism of the 1950s. Yet beneath the surface, something important was happening. A new economic revolution was already underway. And it was beginning in a place that looked nothing like the traditional centers of American industry. When people thought about economic power in earlier generations, they thought about Pittsburgh steel mills, Detroit automobile factories, New York financial institutions, railroads stretching across the continent. They did not think about orchards in Northern California. Yet that is exactly where one of the most significant transformations in modern history was unfolding. The region would eventually become known as Silicon Valley. The name came from silicon, the material used in semiconductors. At first, few people outside specialized industries paid much attention. Microchips seemed highly technical. Computers were expensive. Their applications appeared limited. Most Americans did not yet own one. Few could imagine how important they would become. But innovation often begins quietly. The foundations of Silicon Valley had been forming for decades. Stanford University played an important role. Researchers collaborated with businesses. Engineers pursued new technologies. Government contracts supported advanced projects. Entrepreneurs experimented with ideas that larger companies sometimes ignored. Over time, an unusual ecosystem emerged. Talent, research, capital, risk-taking. Each reinforced the others. What made Silicon Valley different was not simply technology. Many regions possessed talented engineers. Many countries produced scientific research. The unique feature was the way ideas moved from laboratories to businesses. An engineer could develop a concept. Investors might provide funding. A startup could form. If the idea succeeded, it could grow rapidly. If it failed, another idea would replace it. Failure, while painful, was often viewed as part of the process. That attitude encouraged experimentation. And experimentation produced innovation. The personal computer revolution became one of the first major examples. In earlier decades, computers were enormous machines used primarily by governments, universities, and large corporations. Then entrepreneurs began asking a different question. What if computers could become personal? What if ordinary people could own them? At first, the idea sounded unrealistic. Computers seemed too expensive and too complex. Yet technological advances steadily reduced costs and increased capabilities. By the 1980s, personal computers were entering offices, schools, and homes. Entire industries emerged around software, hardware, and digital services. Productivity improved. Information became easier to process. Communication accelerated. The economy was changing once again. Then came the Internet. Few innovations have transformed economic life as profoundly. The early Internet appeared modest. Connections were slow. Websites were simple. Many observers struggled to understand why it mattered. Some viewed it as a niche technology for academics and enthusiasts. History would prove otherwise. The Internet dramatically reduced the cost of sharing information. Distance became less important. Communication became faster. New business models emerged. Companies gained access to global markets. Consumers gained access to vast amounts of information. Entire industries were disrupted. Others were created from scratch. The scale of change was astonishing. A startup operating from a garage could suddenly reach customers across the world. A small software company could become a global enterprise. Entrepreneurs gained opportunities that previous generations could scarcely imagine. America became the center of much of this revolution. Why? The answer reflects many themes that have appeared throughout this documentary. Universities supplied talent. Investors supplied capital. Legal institutions supported entrepreneurship. Large consumer markets allowed successful products to scale rapidly. Immigration supplied skilled workers from around the world. Innovation ecosystems reinforced themselves. The result was a concentration of technological activity unlike anything seen before. Yet technology was only one part of the story. Another major force was globalization. Transportation improvements, communication technologies, and trade agreements increasingly connected national economies. Companies built international supply chains. Products incorporated components manufactured in multiple countries. Capital flowed across borders. Consumers gained access to cheaper goods. Businesses gained access to larger markets. Globalization accelerated economic growth in many regions. It also created winners and losers. Highly educated workers often benefited. Technology firms expanded. Financial institutions gained new opportunities. Meanwhile, some manufacturing communities experienced significant disruption. Factories relocated. Jobs disappeared. Economic transitions proved painful for many workers. These tensions became increasingly important in political debates. The benefits of globalization were real. So were the costs. Understanding both is essential. History rarely produces outcomes that are entirely positive or entirely negative. Most developments create trade-offs. Globalization was no exception. Then came another major shock, the financial crisis of 2008. To understand its significance, it helps to remember how central finance had become to the American economy. Over the 20th century, financial markets expanded enormously. Investors directed capital toward businesses, infrastructure, research, and innovation. This system created significant advantages. It also introduced vulnerabilities. During the early 2000s, excessive risk-taking accumulated in parts of the housing and financial sectors. When problems emerged, they spread rapidly through interconnected markets. Banks faced severe pressure. Credit contracted. Businesses struggled. Unemployment rose. The crisis quickly became global. For many observers, it represented another test of American economic leadership. Had the system become too fragile? Could recovery occur? The answers unfolded over years rather than months. The recovery was uneven. Some regions rebounded quickly, others faced prolonged difficulties. Yet once again, the American economy demonstrated a remarkable capacity for adaptation. Technology companies expanded, new industries emerged, entrepreneurship continued, investment returned. The pattern had appeared before. Crisis, adjustment, renewal, the details changed. The process remained familiar. Today, the United States occupies a fascinating position. It remains one of the world's most influential economies. Its universities continue attracting talent from around the globe. Its financial markets remain among the deepest and most liquid in history. Its companies lead in fields ranging from software and artificial intelligence to biotechnology and aerospace. Its research institutions produce innovations that shape entire industries. Its consumer market remains one of the largest on Earth. And perhaps most importantly, the dollar continues to play a central role in global finance. That role creates powerful advantages. Governments hold dollar reserves. International trade often relies on dollars. Investors seek dollar-denominated assets during periods of uncertainty. These network effects reinforce themselves. The system becomes more valuable because so many participants already use it. Yet, challenges remain. The rise of China has introduced a competitor with enormous scale and ambition. Technological competition is intensifying. Questions surrounding debt, infrastructure, housing, and inequality continue generating debate. Political divisions sometimes complicate long-term decision-making. The future is not guaranteed. It never has been. And that may be the most important lesson. America's economic success was never a straight line. Every era brought obstacles. The nation faced financial panics, civil war, depressions, global conflicts, energy crises, industrial disruptions, technological transitions. Again and again, observers predicted decline. Again and again, new sources of strength emerged. Agriculture gave way to industry. Industry expanded into global manufacturing. Manufacturing was supplemented by finance and technology. Technology continues evolving today. Artificial intelligence may represent the next major transformation. Biotechnology may reshape medicine. Advanced manufacturing could alter production systems. Energy innovations may change global markets. No one knows exactly what comes next. But the search for the next frontier continues. And perhaps that search itself is one of America's greatest advantages. The country that once connected rivers with canals, crossed a continent with railroads, illuminated cities with electricity, and linked billions through digital networks remains engaged in the same basic process. Experimenting, building, adapting, reinventing, the story that began with scattered colonies along the Atlantic coast has not ended. It is still unfolding. And to understand why that story matters, we must step back one final time and look at the bigger picture. Because the rise of America's economy was never really about money alone. It was about something much larger. At the beginning of this story, we asked a question that seems simple on the surface. How did the United States become the world's economic giant? After traveling across nearly 2.5 centuries of history, the answer is both clearer and more complicated than it first appeared. Because there was never one reason. There was never a secret formula hidden in a government document. There was never a single law, invention, president, entrepreneur, or moment that transformed America into an economic superpower. Instead, the rise of the United States emerged from the interaction of countless forces, some planned and some accidental, unfolding over generations. And perhaps the most surprising part of all is this. At almost every stage, the outcome could have been different. History often looks inevitable in hindsight. Once we know the ending, we begin to see a straight line leading toward it. But the people living through history rarely enjoy that perspective. To them, the future remains uncertain. And for most of American history, the future was uncertain indeed. The revolution could have failed. The young republic could have fractured. Westward expansion could have stalled. Industrialization could have developed more slowly. The Civil War could have permanently divided the nation. Financial crises could have caused lasting decline. Global leadership could have fallen elsewhere. Again and again, alternative futures existed. That is why America's rise is not merely a story about success. It is a story about opportunity repeatedly meeting preparation. Let's begin with geography. Throughout this documentary, geography has appeared almost like a silent character, never fully in the spotlight, always influencing events. The truth is that America inherited one of the most advantageous geographic positions on Earth, not because every inch of territory was valuable, not because prosperity was guaranteed, but because the combination of geographic advantages was unusually powerful. The eastern half of North America contains some of the world's most productive agricultural land. The Mississippi River system connects enormous regions through navigable waterways. Natural harbors along the Atlantic coast facilitated trade. The Great Lakes created additional transportation routes. The Pacific eventually opened access to Asia. The Atlantic connected America to Europe. Two oceans provided both opportunity and protection. These features mattered. They lowered transportation costs, encouraged settlement, facilitated trade, supported population growth, created economic flexibility. Yet geography alone cannot explain America's success. History contains many resource-rich countries that never became economic giants. Natural advantages create possibilities. Human decisions determine whether those possibilities become reality. That brings us to institutions, one of the least dramatic but most important factors in economic history. Factories attract attention. Skyscrapers attract attention. Inventors attract attention. Institutions rarely do, yet institutions shape the environment in which everything else occurs. The United States developed systems that generally encouraged investment, entrepreneurship, and commerce. Property rights created incentives for economic activity. Contracts could be enforced. Businesses could operate across a large internal market. Investors could commit capital with a reasonable expectation that rules would remain relatively stable. None of these systems were perfect. American history contains numerous examples of injustice, exclusion, discrimination, and unequal opportunity. Many groups were denied access to economic benefits for long periods of time. Recognizing these realities is essential to understanding the full story. At the same time, the broader institutional framework created conditions favorable to economic expansion. The combination proved powerful. Then there were people, millions upon millions of people. No economic history of the United States can be separated from immigration. Generation after generation arrived from distant lands. Some came willingly. Others came under desperate circumstances. Some fled famine. Some fled persecution. Some sought economic opportunity. Many arrived with little more than hope. Together they helped build farms, railroads, factories, businesses, universities, laboratories, and cities. They supplied labor. They supplied skills. They supplied ambition. And perhaps most importantly, they continuously renewed the country's talent base. One of the most remarkable features of American history is the extent to which newcomers repeatedly became contributors to economic growth. The pattern appears again and again. An immigrant arrives with few resources. A family works for decades. Children gain education. Businesses emerge. Communities expand. Innovations follow. The story repeats. Not every time, not for everyone, but often enough to influence the trajectory of the entire nation. Then there was innovation. If geography provided raw materials and institutions created incentives, innovation multiplied what was possible. The American economy repeatedly became more productive rather than merely larger. That distinction matters enormously. A society can become wealthier by acquiring more resources. But long-term prosperity usually depends on productivity, the ability to create more value with the same effort. Again and again, American innovators transformed productivity. The Erie Canal reduced transportation costs. Railroads connected markets. Telegraphs accelerated communication. Electricity expanded industrial capabilities. Assembly lines revolutionized manufacturing. Computers transformed information processing. The Internet altered global communication. Artificial intelligence may be beginning another transformation today. Each innovation generated ripple effects far beyond its original purpose. This pattern reveals another important truth. Economic revolutions are rarely isolated events. They interact with one another. Railroads increased the value of farmland. Telegraphs increased the value of railroads. Electricity improved factories. Mass production lowered consumer costs. Computers improved productivity across industries. The Internet connected everything. Progress often occurs through combinations rather than individual breakthroughs. Yet even these factors are not enough to explain America's rise. There is another ingredient that historians sometimes hesitate to discuss: luck, not magical luck. Historical luck. Timing, circumstance, events beyond direct control. Consider the world wars. The United States did not create those conflicts. It did not control the decisions that led Europe into catastrophe. Yet the economic consequences were profound. While much of Europe and parts of Asia experienced physical destruction, the American mainland emerged largely intact. Its factories survived, its infrastructure remained operational, its productive capacity expanded. These advantages helped shift the balance of economic power. History often works this way. Unexpected events create opportunities for some and disasters for others. Nations cannot control every circumstance, but they can influence how they respond. And America frequently found itself prepared to capitalize on changing conditions. This ability to adapt may be the most important factor of all. Because if there is one recurring theme across the entire story, it is reinvention. The United States has repeatedly changed the foundations of its economic strength. In the early republic, agriculture dominated. Then, transportation networks transformed commerce. Industrialization shifted the economy toward manufacturing. The 20th century elevated finance, technology, and research. The 21st century continues introducing new sectors and opportunities. Many nations become successful because they discover one great advantage. America repeatedly discovered new advantages. Or perhaps more accurately, it repeatedly created them. That distinction matters. The economy did not remain frozen. It evolved. When one source of growth slowed, another often emerged. When old industries declined, new industries appeared. When technologies changed, entrepreneurs adapted. This process was not painless. Entire communities sometimes suffered during transitions. Workers faced disruption, regions struggled. Economic change always produces winners and losers, yet the broader system retained an unusual capacity for renewal. And that renewal remains visible today. The modern American economy looks very different from the economy of Andrew Carnegie. It looks very different from the economy of Henry Ford. It looks very different from the economy that emerged after World War II. Yet, connections remain. The same rivers still flow. The same ports still operate. The same universities continue educating students. The same capital markets continue funding innovation. The same culture of experimentation continues generating new ideas. The same geographic advantages still exist. History does not disappear. It accumulates. Each generation builds on foundations created by previous generations. That is one reason economic leadership can become so durable. Advantages compound. Infrastructure compounds. Knowledge compounds. Institutions compound. Networks compound. The benefits created decades or centuries earlier continue influencing the present. At the same time, no position is permanent. History offers countless examples of societies that assumed their dominance would last forever. Most eventually discovered otherwise. Economic leadership must be maintained. Competitors emerge. Technologies evolve. Demographics shift. Political systems face new pressures. The future remains uncertain. America faces serious challenges today. Rising competition from other nations, technological disruption, debt, infrastructure needs, housing affordability concerns, political polarization, global instability. These challenges are real. But uncertainty itself is nothing new. Every generation of Americans has confronted uncertainty. The founders faced uncertainty. The railroad builders faced uncertainty. The industrialists faced uncertainty. The generation that endured the Great Depression faced uncertainty. The innovators of Silicon Valley faced uncertainty. What changed history was not the absence of obstacles. It was the response to them. And that brings us back to the original question. Why America? Because geography created possibilities. Because institutions encouraged investment. Because immigrants supplied energy and talent. Because innovation increased productivity. Because entrepreneurs pursued opportunities. Because capital flowed toward ideas. Because the nation repeatedly adapted when circumstances changed. Because preparation often met opportunity. And yes, because history occasionally delivered advantages that could be exploited by a society capable of recognizing them. Remove any one factor, and the story becomes harder to explain. Together, they produced one of the most extraordinary economic transformations humanity has ever witnessed. A collection of colonies became a continental economy. A continental economy became an industrial powerhouse. An industrial powerhouse became the center of global finance. A financial center became a technological leader. And through every stage, the story remained unfinished. Because ultimately, the rise of America was never just a story about wealth. It was a story about human ambition operating at continental scale. A story about what happens when millions of people pursue opportunity across generations. A story about geography, innovation, risk, failure, adaptation, and persistence. A story about how small decisions can produce enormous consequences, and perhaps that is the most important lesson of all. The world's largest economic giant was not built in a single generation. It was built over centuries. One canal, one railroad, one factory, one invention, one immigrant family, one entrepreneur, one opportunity at a time. And somewhere in that long chain of decisions, risks, and accidents, a young republic on the edge of the Atlantic became the most powerful economic force the modern world has ever known.